Learn your own rules.
I can't help but appreciate games that take a well-known trope and turn it on its head. Like in Plague Inc., where you play as diseases trying to kill off the world instead of Pandemic, where you're trying to save it. Or Spirit Island, where you're fighting against colonists arriving on your island instead of colonizing the world, like in Catan or Navigador. Or Viticulture, where you're distilling wine instead of drinking it straight from the bottle in your parents' basement. So it should come as no surprise that a game which subverts other Lovecraftian games like Arkham Horror or Mansions of Madness caught my eye. Fate of the Elder Gods is designed by Christopher Kirkman, Richard Launius, and Daryl Lauder, and it's published by Greater Than Games. Over the course of the game, players take on the role of crazed cults trying to summon their own Elder Gods and bring about the end of humanity. You'll play cards that let you cast spells or move the Cthulhu statue to different locations that correspond to specific actions you can take, such as drawing more cards, gaining artifacts with unique powers, or scoring points to summon your Elder God. But that's as far as I'm going to go into the discussion of how the game is played. If you'd like to know more about how the game plays before going on, check out one of these other fantastic videos and then come back when you're done. When you set up Fate of the Elder Gods, the very first thing you're going to notice is the game is absolutely gorgeous. Just look at it. The original illustrations are flavorful and unique. The Fate stones have a shading effect that really makes them pop. The main board is unique and interesting. It's all fantastic. And it better well should be for that MSRP. Altogether, I've got very little I could complain about component-wise. As always, I wish the player boards were a bit thicker, but at least they've got a very nice matting on them. The cultist pieces right out of the box clash a bit with the rest of the game's aesthetic, but a couple of quick coats of paint really makes them look fantastic, and they help elevate the game's visual appeal. Physical presentation aside though, theme really isn't Fate's strongest point, which I know saying makes me sound like I ought to be committed to the institution of mental gaming health, and put under the watchful eye of Dr. Basil and friends. After all, anybody looking at the game would swear it's got to be a thematic romp, a la Arkham Horror. But when you break things down, playing a yellow star card so you can move a Cthulhu statue to the streets of Arkham, to send pistol-wielding trench-coat-clad ladies to put tree branches on your opponent's houses, isn't really that evocative. I don't mean to say the game isn't thematic at all, but it is more abstract. The theme comes less from the individual actions you take, and more from the urgency that pushes you to make snap decisions on how to best manipulate the board state, mitigate the inevitable negatives coming your way, and decide which sacrifices will be most beneficial to you. It helps that Fate is more of a tactical game than a strategic one. Each turn is less about preparing a perfect 4-course meal, and more about seeing what kind of dish you can scrape together with the cheese whiz and canned chicken Alton Brown is forcing you to cook with. It's a frantic scramble to get ahead by whatever means necessary that pushes Fate's thematic relevance. I consider myself rather nonpartisan when it comes to games. I like a good dice chucker, but I'm equally drawn to a nice, dry as dirt Euro. Fate of the Elder Gods, though, isn't either of these. I'm not really sure what to classify it as, other than some kind of bizarre amalgamation of the two that blends tightly formed mechanics with copious amounts of luck, in a way that almost defines its own place in the Ameri Euro genre. Surprisingly, though, Fate pulls it off pretty darn well. It's a game that's easy to teach and quick to play, the actions you take are intuitive, and the gameplay naturally helps players learn as they go. In fact, I've had a good number of games where the newest player won, and not primarily due to beginner's luck either. But while I do like Fate of the Elder Gods mechanics overall, the hand management aspect is something I'm torn on. I love it when a game features multifaceted components, but the card play doesn't seem quite as polished as other aspects of the game. In Fate of the Elder Gods, you have a hand of cards that can be used on your turn for a few different things. You can use them to move the Fate piece and take an action, but you can also cast or ready them to use the spell text printed on their faces. Or, if you've already readied them, you can use the symbol printed on their backs as resources to cast or ready additional spells. So for every card you play, you have to make a choice. Do you play the card as an action, or do you save it to cast the spell? And this isn't as balanced a decision as it should be, as while most of the spells have decently powerful effects, they don't often feel game-changing enough to make the sacrifice of casting them feel justified. And by sacrifice, I don't mean your cat or your firstborn, or even in-game resources like cultists. I mean sacrifice and opportunity cost. The most powerful spells require 3 symbols in order to be cast or readied, but you're rarely going to just end up on a location that has the 3 exact symbols you need to cast a spell. Even if there is a location on the board that has the sigils you need, you have to hope the person before you doesn't go there first, since you can't take the same action as the player before you. Then, you have to hope you have the correct card or a pair of matching symbols to get you there. And then you have to consider if the space has an action you actually want to take. Because of these considerations, it's rare that all these criteria are going to line up perfectly, and as a result, to cast a specific spell, you almost always have to play suboptimally. You have to take actions you don't really want, or load cultists in areas where you don't really need them. What this means is lots of the game comes down to towing the line between playing efficiently to get the most out of your turn, or prepping some of the more powerful spells. Even after nearly 24 games, I'm still not sure what the best approach is. In fact, I find myself constantly ignoring the spell information on the cards in my hand unless I get lucky and happen to be at a location where I can cast a spell right away. I'd like to have seen the spells either be a bit stronger on average, or a bit easier to cast. Maybe adjusting the spell's cost of most of the cards to 2 symbols, while only a handful of them had 3 symbols, would make this aspect of the game a bit more fluid. But to be fair, reservations about playing efficiently may not be fair criticism for Fate of the Elder Gods, since it's not really a game about playing efficiently. It's about checking dice, pulling the wool over your opponent's eyes, and obtaining the big W at all costs. Which leads nicely into the next topic. Now a confession. To my eternal shame, I must admit that my purchase of Fate of the Elder Gods was an entirely impulsive decision. The Kickstarter released at a vulnerable time in my life, a time in which the allure of Kickstarter games was simply too great to ignore. Back then, I was backing stuff left and right with almost no knowledge of what it all entailed. In this case, artwork looked great. The theme was right up my alley, so I just slapped $60 down without really thinking about it and went on about my day. I'm pleased to say that these days I'm doing a better job of resisting similar urges. But to be fair, that's primarily due to my wife hiding my credit cards and less because of any Herculean effort on my part. I tell you this because when the game arrived and I cracked open the rulebook, my heart dropped a little. After a quick read-through, I realized that this was going to be a pretty aggressive game, which isn't something either of my normal gaming groups is overly fond of. And even I'm not all that partial to heavy take-that games either. Gaming's about having a good time, and more often than not, tension and emotions seem to get a little high when a game revolves too much around those "ha, got you" moments. Luckily though, that hasn't been a problem with Fate of the Elder Gods. See, while those take-that moments do occur pretty often, especially later in the game, they rarely leach the enjoyment out of the experience because of a few different factors. Even the most cautious players are going to be raided by investigators, or hit with a curse card at some point during the game, even if they aren't targeted at all by other players. So anytime you target a player with an effect, you're simply causing bad stuff to happen a little bit sooner than it would have anyway. Because Fate of the Elder Gods gameplay is built around the expectation that bad stuff is going to happen to you, none of it is so overpowering that it will take you out of the game. There's one curse card I could think of that can situationally be a bit too oppressive, but that's the exception rather than the rule. Turns play quickly, so you don't have those dreadful gaps where you aren't doing anything, aside from thinking about how Daryl just killed one of your cultists at the other worlds. And really, you shouldn't even have time for that. I've read a few accounts from people that say the game instills a lot of AP. But I have to stress the fact that if turns in this game are taking more than a minute, you're playing it wrong. This is the type of game that should be played fast and loose. Your options each turn are purposefully limited to around 3 different actions to help narrow your focus, keep things moving, and keep the board state changing regularly, so setting concrete plans too far ahead isn't really possible. Altogether, even though neither of my groups like games with much direct player conflict, Fate hasn't been an issue. Even the most reserved of us has had a ton of fun dropping spells or taunting other players with curses. And if I could just take a moment to talk about curses, what a fantastic idea! They do such a good job of injecting more table talk and adding more of a mind game element to the experience. Oh, Daryl, you wanted to visit the library? Well, it'd be a real shame if you were to ready a spell. Overall, I quite liked Fate of the Elder Gods. It certainly got its own niche, and I can't think of any games that do quite what it does. so I would think there's a spot for it in most people's collections, even those that aren't generally interested in these types of games. Though there is one other criticism I've got. I wish the game offered another method for scoring summoning points. There are 2 reliable ways of doing so on the board, and a handful of less common ones like spell cards or variable player powers, but I'd like to have seen at least one more prominent method to help keep your options open. That being said, I do love that there are 2 different methods for ending the game, either by scoring 9 summoning points or having a player's track filled with elder signs. Both methods seem balanced enough, though I have noticed that my 2-player games tend to end with a player filling their summoning point track, while my 4-player games typically end by one player filling up on elder signs. 3-player games tend to be a good balance between the 2. This does a great job of making the game feel varied at different player counts, which I appreciate, though in the end I have found 3 players to be my ideal count, simply because of the balance it provides. So is Fate of the Elder Gods a good game? Yes. I enjoyed Fate of the Elder Gods quite a bit. More so than I rightfully deserve, to be honest, considering how little I knew about the game before I bought it. It's a game I can heartfully recommend to most people. Those that stick solely to medium or heavy Euros, or hate randomness, should steer clear of this one. For anyone else, I think this can very easily be a win, especially if you like games that have those big moments where everything gets loud and raucous. And if you're interested in the game, I definitely recommend picking up the Beast from Beyond expansion as well, since it adds more options to your gameplay with almost no additional rules overhead. Thanks for watching, folks. Before I send you off, I've had a bunch of people tell me I'm supposed to have a Twitter thing for others to contact me with. So, feel free to drop me a tweet or an email if for some reason you want to get a hold of me. That's it for today. Game on!